Not the silence of an empty room, but the deep, ancient stillness of a world before memory, before the names of kings, before the first spark of recorded history, before even the earliest human dared to call a patch of earth home. Somewhere, beneath stone, ice, and time itself, a city rests. From the surface, nothing betrays its presence. No crumbling towers rise into the clouds, no toppled walls mark its outline. It is hidden, sealed away by epochs of upheaval, buried under the weight of continents shifting and oceans rising. And yet, its story is not gone. It has been whispered across ages, etched in fragments into the world around us. Patterns in stone, anomalies in the fossil record, impossible artifacts found where they should not be. Known history insists that civilization is young. The first cities, by accepted chronology, emerged around 6,000 years ago in the fertile floodplains of Mesopotamia. Before that, we are told, humanity lived in small, scattered bands of hunter-gatherers. Agriculture, writing, and architecture were inventions of a recent post-Ice Age world. This is the story we learn in classrooms, the one printed in encyclopedias, the one confirmed by countless archaeological digs. But there is another story, a hidden truth that does not fit neatly into textbooks. It tells of a city older than humanity itself, one that rose not once but many times, enduring not just centuries or millennia, but the very cycles of life and death that have erased entire species from existence. A city that survived 5 mass extinctions. The thought is almost absurd. 5 times in Earth's history, life as we know it has been reset. The Ordovician event froze the seas. The Devonian collapse starved the oceans. The Permian cataclysm, the deadliest of all, wiped out over 90% of species. The Triassic purge cleared the way for the rise of dinosaurs. And finally, the Cretaceous impact ended their reign. Each time the biosphere was shattered, each time it began again from the rubble. How could any city, any trace of intelligent design, endure such ruin? And yet, there are signs. High in mountain ranges far from any modern settlement, weather-worn stones stand in unnatural alignments. Deep beneath Antarctic ice sheets, ground-penetrating radar scans reveal vast symmetrical structures. In ancient seabeds, now turned to desert, explorers find chambers carved with scenes no known civilization should remember. Scenes of skies darkened for years, of oceans boiling, of the world reborn. Mainstream explanations exist for each anomaly: erosion, coincidence, misinterpretation. But when viewed together, the picture changes. Patterns emerge, and those patterns lead to one conclusion: that perhaps what we call civilization is not a linear progression from primitive to advanced, but a cycle, one that began long before us, and may have roots stretching hundreds of millions of years into the past. The prologue to this story is not written in books. It is written in the bedrock of the planet, in strata that span the rise and fall of worlds. It is hidden in myths that outlast their original languages, in legends of first cities swallowed by the sea or entombed under mountains. The Sumerians spoke of Eridu, the city where kingship descended from the heavens, built in an age before the Great Flood. Aboriginal elders tell of Chiringa, places, sacred sites that existed before the sun took its current path. The Dogon speak of great structures beneath the desert from the time before time. These are not isolated tales, they are echoes of something shared, something that endured beyond disaster. Imagine a city designed not for comfort, but for survival on a planetary scale. A place where architecture is as much shield as shelter, walls engineered to withstand volcanic ash, foundations deep enough to resist earthquakes, ventilation systems that could function in a world cloaked in dust and darkness. Imagine power drawn, not from fragile grids, but from the slow, steady heartbeats of geothermal currents. Imagine vaults containing the seeds of species, the memory of languages, the blueprint of life itself, waiting for the world to heal before emerging again. We are not used to thinking of cities as immortal. Modern metropolises, for all their glass and steel, are fragile things. A century of neglect, and they crumble. A single war, and they burn. A flood, and they vanish beneath the water. Plet, and they vanish beneath the water. Yet, what if somewhere, deep in the planet's forgotten history, a people found a way to build not for decades or centuries, but for extinction events? If such a city existed, it would not flaunt itself to the surface world. It would be hidden, its survival ensured by invisibility. Its architects would have known that the planet itself was not a stable stage, but a shifting, dangerous actor capable of wiping away everything in an instant. And so they built where catastrophe could not reach them. They built in ways we cannot yet replicate, with materials we have yet to rediscover. Finding it would be like finding a ghost, a presence felt long before it is seen. And perhaps that is exactly where we are now. The clues are scattered and fragmented, hidden in plain sight, but requiring a willingness to look beyond what is comfortable, to question the neat timelines we have inherited. The city's story is not just about what survived, it is about why. For what purpose would a people ensure their home endured across ages in which the continents themselves changed shape? Was it for themselves to return when the world healed, or was it for something else? For us, or for a future still to come? In this documentary, we will follow the trail from the well-lit halls of scientific consensus into the shadowed corridors of possibility. We will weigh the evidence, examine the myths, and confront the uncomfortable thought that the past may be far older and far stranger than we have ever allowed ourselves to believe. Our journey begins here, in the stillness before the first great revelation. The city waits, as it always has, hidden beneath the slow drift of continents and the endless fall of seasons. It has seen the skies darken and the oceans rise. It has outlived the roar of dinosaurs and the silence after their extinction. It has endured fire, ice, and the uncountable years between. And now, for the first time in human history, we may be close enough to touch it. If the history of Earth were a book, its pages would not turn slowly and evenly. They would be punctuated by violent, sudden rips, moments when the story itself was torn apart and rewritten from the beginning. These moments are the mass extinctions, nature's way of pressing the reset button on life. Mainstream science identifies 5 great extinction events in the planet's last 500 million years. Each one was a catastrophe so total, so indiscriminate that it left scars in the rock record visible even today. In these layers of stone, geologists read the same story again and again: a thriving biosphere suddenly reduced to near emptiness, followed by a slow, stubborn recovery. The Ordovician, Silurian extinction about 444 million years ago began with a freeze. Continental drift had drawn much of the landmass toward the South Pole, and massive ice sheets formed. Sea levels plummeted, exposing continental shelves and collapsing marine ecosystems. Over 85% of marine species perished. Known history tells us the land was barren, the oceans the only cradle for complex life. No city could have existed here. The textbooks say there were no builders yet. But the hidden question remains: what if we have underestimated the diversity of life in these oceans? What if civilization did not begin on land at all? Next came the late Devonian extinction, 359 million years ago. This was not a single event, but a drawn-out collapse that lasted millions of years. The oceans, still the center of most life, were choked by algal blooms and oxygen depletion. Coral reefs vanished. Mainstream paleontology blames massive volcanic eruptions and possible asteroid impacts. The idea of an intelligent species here is dismissed outright, but certain deep ocean fossil beds show puzzling patterns, regularly spaced grooves and formations, as if shaped by purpose, not chance. The third, and by far the most devastating, was the Permian Triassic extinction, 252 million years ago, often called the Great Dying. Over 90% of all species were obliterated. Theories range from massive volcanic outpourings in Siberia to a rapid rise in methane levels, creating a runaway greenhouse effect. It is here that some of the most baffling anomalies appear, rock strata bearing what look like tool marks, but dating to a time when, according to the official timeline, no complex land animals beyond reptiles and amphibians existed. The idea of an advanced society enduring this kind of apocalypse challenges everything we think we know about evolution and history. Then came the Triassic-Jurassic extinction 201 million years ago. By this point, the continents were clustered into the supercontinent Pangaea. The extinction cleared the way for the age of dinosaurs. Mainstream science attributes it to massive volcanic activity as Pangaea began to split. Yet in certain South American and African fossil beds, researchers have found mysterious spherical objects embedded alongside prehistoric plant remains. Officially, they are dismissed as concretions, natural mineral growths. But under magnification, their surface markings appear suspiciously precise, almost decorative. The last of the five was the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction 66 million years ago. This is the one most people know, the asteroid that ended the dinosaurs. A 6-mile-wide rock slammed into what is now the Yucatan Peninsula, throwing enough dust and debris into the atmosphere to block sunlight for years. The global food chain collapsed. Textbooks end the story here by declaring it the dawn of the age of mammals. And yet some anomalous underwater ruins, found far from any tectonic fault lines, are dated controversially to this period. Could there have been a stronghold that endured the impact winter? Each extinction wiped the planet clean and forced evolution to start over. At least, that is the accepted version. But this official narrative rests on a crucial assumption that life always starts from scratch after a catastrophe. The hidden truth may be different. Imagine that, during each cataclysm, certain enclaves of advanced life found ways to survive deep beneath the ocean in geothermal-powered habitats, inside hollowed mountains sealed from toxic air, or in underground networks warmed by the Earth's core. These survivors would not need to reinvent civilization from nothing each time. They would carry their knowledge forward, building upon it through ages when the surface was uninhabitable. If such a city existed through all five extinctions, it would be a witness to the very cycles that erased nearly all life. Its archives would hold the story of worlds no scientist has seen, of creatures that lived and died before humanity was even a dream. But more importantly, it would hold the secrets of resilience, how to endure the very forces that seem impossible to survive. For the scientific community, the challenge is evidence. The further back in time we look, the scarcer the record becomes. Rock is recycled by plate tectonics, eroded by water, ground down by ice. Anything not hidden deep underground or far beneath the sea is destroyed. This scarcity is the shield of the hidden city, its greatest protection, and our greatest obstacle to finding it. Yet there is another layer to this puzzle: myths. Across cultures there are stories not just of one great flood or one cosmic fire, but of many. Entire worlds lost, rebuilt, lost again. The Aztecs spoke of the 5 suns, each an age of the world destroyed by catastrophe. The Hindus tell of endless cycles of creation and destruction, kalpas, where the world is periodically remade. Aboriginal stories recall multiple skyfalls and earth burnings. These are treated by anthropologists as symbolic cosmologies, not historical accounts. But they align uncannily with the extinction timeline known to science. If those myths contain even fragments of memory, passed down not through unbroken human lineage, but through a chain of survivor civilizations, then the mass extinctions were not just natural resets. They were tests. The known history tells us each time life was obliterated. The hidden truth may tell us each time someone survived. Understanding the 5 extinctions is more than an academic exercise. It is the framework for everything that follows. If the city we are seeking endured all of them, then its story will not be linear, but cyclical. It will not resemble the rise and fall arcs of known empire. It will be something else entirely, a heartbeat that has pulsed through the ages, steady while the surface world burned, froze, and began again. And as we will see in the next chapter, the first whispers of its existence are not found in the deep recesses of legend, but in the stone beneath our feet, where impossible clues lie waiting for those who dare to look closer. It begins, as so many great discoveries do, with something small, a shard of stone pulled from a cliff face, a curious groove in a fossil bed, an object so out of place it seems almost like a prank, until you realize it is embedded in millions of years of undisturbed strata. These are the whispers in the rock. For most geologists, the stone record is a diary of the planet, each layer telling a chapter of its long story. The rules are clear. The deeper you go, the older the layer. Fossils appear in a predictable order: simple life first, then fish, then land animals, then mammals, then humans. Tools and artifacts belong in the very top layers, where the brief chapter of human history resides. Anything else is contamination, misidentification, or fraud. And yet, every so often, something breaks the rules. In the late 19th century, miners in California uncovered a set of stone tools, hammers, mortars, pestles, buried in gold-bearing gravel layers estimated to be millions of years old. Mainstream scientists at the time dismissed the findings as mistakes. Decades later, similar anomalies surfaced in South Africa: metallic spheres, perfectly round with grooves cut around their equators, found in mineral deposits over 2 billion years old. Geologists declared them natural concretions, but the grooves, their uniformity, suggested intent. These are not isolated incidents. Across continents, there are reports, often buried in obscure journals, of carved stone fragments, metal objects, even what appear to be footprints preserved in rock layers that predate humans by tens or hundreds of millions of years. The footprints are especially unsettling. Some resemble human feet, complete with arches and toes. In 1968, a fossilized print was found in Utah with what looked like the outline of a sandal, stepping on a trilobite. The trilobite itself was from the Cambrian period, over 500 million years ago. Mainstream explanations lean toward misinterpretation. Rock erosion can create shapes that mimic tools or footprints. Geological forces can crack, press, and form patterns that seem artificial. But when the anomalies repeat across sites with the same features and proportions, the coincidence argument begins to strain. If the official view is correct, all such findings are simply geological curiosities, rocks playing tricks on our pattern-seeking brains. But the hidden truth offers another possibility. These are not accidents of nature, but remnants of something real, fragments of a civilization that existed when the world looked nothing like it does today. To entertain this possibility is to imagine a world unimaginably old, where intelligent life walked among creatures now long extinct. A world where what we think of as human might not have been human at all, yet possessed the same instincts to build, to shape, to leave a mark. And when the great extinction events came, they did not vanish without a trace. The most compelling of these whispers are the ones that seem to follow a pattern of concealment. Many are found deep underground, beneath layers of sediment that should have obliterated anything delicate. Others appear in caves, sealed for millions of years, as if deliberately hidden. Could it be that some survivors of these ancient cataclysms intentionally left markers, subtle, nearly indestructible, waiting to be rediscovered when the time was right? One intriguing example comes from a coal seam in Pennsylvania, where miners reportedly unearthed an intricately carved stone block deep within the earth. The coal layer it came from dated to over 300 million years ago in the Carboniferous period. Officially, such an artifact cannot exist. Coal seams form from ancient plant matter compressed over eons, long before any humans appeared. The block disappeared into private hands, and its whereabouts are unknown. Without it, the story remains just that. A story. This is the problem with whispers in the rock. They are fragile, easy to dismiss, and often vanish before proper investigation. Many are thrown away, destroyed, or left unrecorded because they do not fit the accepted narrative. In the halls of academia, publishing such finds without ironclad proof can end a career. As a result, most researchers turn away, unwilling to stake their reputations on the improbable. And yet, for those who keep looking, the anomalies pile up. They form a kind of shadow record, one that runs parallel to the neat, linear history in our textbooks. This shadow record suggests something astonishing, that the story of civilization may stretch far beyond the horizon of our current knowledge into a past so deep it blurs the line between geology and archaeology. If true, it means that the first clues to the city that survived are not found in written language, pottery shards, or ruins we can walk through. They are locked in the earth itself, encoded in layers of stone, disguised as natural formations or mistaken for geological accidents. They are the faintest of echoes, the last surviving signals of a world erased, not just once, but multiple times. The known history tells us that stone tools appear only with humans, and that humans themselves appear only in the last blink of geological time. The hidden truth whispers that tools, perhaps not made by humans as we know them, might have existed in ages when the continents were still fused into supercontinents, when the skies held unfamiliar constellations, and when mass extinction loomed just beyond the horizon. These clues are easy to overlook if you don't know where to look, or if you refuse to look at all. But once you've seen them, the question becomes impossible to ignore. If we have already found fragments of impossible age in the rock beneath us, what else might be hidden there waiting for the right hands to uncover it? And that is where the trail leads next, not to an open plain or a sunlit ruin, but to the frozen heart of the Earth's most inaccessible continent. Because if the whispers in the rock are the city's faint heartbeat, then what lies under miles of ancient ice may be its voice, preserved in silence for millions of years. It is a place so hostile, so removed from the rhythms of ordinary life, that almost nothing survives there. Temperatures plunge far below what human skin can bear. Winds scream across endless white plains at over 100 miles per hour. The sun disappears for months at a time, leaving the land in a darkness broken only by the eerie shimmer of the aurora. This is Antarctica, the coldest, driest, most remote continent on Earth, and beneath its ice, something waits. For most of human history, Antarctica was a blank spot on the map, a mystery too distant to explore. Only in the last century have we been able to pierce its icy veil, mapping the contours of the land buried beneath up to 3 miles of frozen water. The continent, as we see it today, is deceptive. The ice is not the land. Beneath it lies a world of mountains, valleys, and ancient river systems, frozen in place for millions of years. It is here that the first startling signals came. In the late 20th century, scientists began using ground-penetrating radar and satellite imaging to study the bedrock beneath the ice. What they expected to find were natural formations, jagged peaks, carved basins, and geological chaos from the continents shifting over eons. What they found instead in certain locations were shapes that seemed anything but natural, perfectly straight lines, intersections at precise right angles, rectangular patterns that repeated with mathematical precision. To geologists, these were anomalies, probably the result of ice movement distorting radar images. But to others, they looked like the ghostly outline of something built a city. One of the most famous of these sites lies deep inland, far from any research base. Known informally among researchers as Grid E, it shows a symmetrical arrangement of buried structures spanning several square miles. In the radar data, the formations appear as sharp-edged shadows beneath hundreds of feet of compacted ice. Their geometry is unnervingly regular, as if some ancient architect had drawn lines with a ruler across the frozen earth. Mainstream science offers explanations that fit the accepted timeline. Perhaps the grid is the remnant of an ancient volcanic formation, or the way glaciers fractured over bedrock. But the hidden truth proposes something far more radical, that these are the preserved foundations of a city older than the ice itself. If so, then this city must have been built before Antarctica was covered in ice, a time when the continent was lush and green, home to forests, rivers, and possibly even civilizations. According to geological evidence, Antarctica's transformation into the frozen wasteland we know began around 34 million years ago. If the structures predate the ice, they could be tens of millions of years old, already ancient before the last mass extinction event. Skeptics argue that no civilization could have existed that far back. There is simply no evidence of intelligent life in the fossil record from that period. But that assumes we have found all the evidence. The truth is, Antarctica is perhaps the least explored land on Earth. Less than 1% of its subglacial terrain has been directly studied. If there is a place where the remnants of a pre-human civilization could remain untouched, it is here. Some of the most tantalizing clues come from ice core samples. While their primary purpose is to study climate history, these cores occasionally pull up microscopic anomalies, traces of materials that do not belong in a purely natural context. Certain layers contain what appear to be fragments of worked stone or unusual metallic dusts. Official reports note them briefly, attributing them to contamination from drilling equipment or long-distance transport by wind. But those who have examined the samples closely say the materials bear signs of having been shaped, as if they were once part of something larger. Then there are the maps. The most famous is the Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral, which some claim shows the coastline of Antarctica free of ice, something supposedly impossible without modern survey techniques. Historians counter that the map likely depicts South America, distorted by the limits of the time's cartography. Yet, in combination with the radar anomalies, the map takes on a new intrigue. What if someone long before us had mapped Antarctica as it was in its green age? The idea of an ancient city beneath the ice is not new. Fringe researchers have speculated about it for decades, often dismissed as pseudoscience. But the difference now is the technology. Modern imaging, coupled with climate models and geological surveys, is revealing patterns that are difficult to wave away entirely. Even some cautious scientists admit, off the record, that the data raises questions that can't yet be answered. Imagine, for a moment, what such a city would be like. Built in a time when Antarctica was temperate, it might have been a coastal metropolis, surrounded by fertile plains and navigable rivers. Its architecture could have been engineered for resilience, designed to endure seismic shifts, floods, and temperature extremes. When the ice came, slowly at first, then with unstoppable force, its inhabitants may have had decades, even centuries, to respond. Perhaps they migrated. Perhaps they sealed the city knowing it would be preserved in the cold. If the city was part of a larger global network, its fall would have been only one chapter in a much older story, one of adaptation and survival across multiple extinction events. The very fact that we might be detecting its remains suggests that its builder understood permanence in a way we do not. For now, direct exploration of these sites is nearly impossible. The depth of the ice, the remoteness, and the harsh conditions make drilling prohibitively expensive and dangerous. International treaties also limit certain activities in Antarctica, ostensibly to protect its fragile environment. Officially, no archaeological investigation of subglacial anomalies is planned. But the whispers persist. Satellite images are quietly shared among researchers. Rumors circulate of expeditions that have gone further than the public knows, only to return without public reports. In the absence of proof, the city beneath the ice remains in the realm of speculation, a ghost whose outline we can see, but whose face is still hidden. The known history tells us Antarctica has been lifeless for millions of years. Its ice a sterile vault, The hidden truth suggests it might be a vault in a very different sense, one holding the remains of a civilization that saw the world change 5 times and prepared for it. And if this is true, then somewhere beneath that frozen silence lies not just the evidence of their survival, but perhaps the key to ours. From here, the trail of the indestructible city takes us further back in time, to the greatest catastrophe the planet has ever faced, a moment when nearly all life vanished, except perhaps for those who had already learned how to endure. 252 million years ago, the Permian-Triassic extinction struck with a force unlike anything before or since. In the span of a geological heartbeat, over 90% of all species vanished. The oceans turned acidic and stagnant, the land became a furnace. Even insects, normally resilient to catastrophes, suffered massive losses. Mainstream science attributes this apocalypse to a chain reaction of disasters. In what is now Siberia, volcanic eruptions of unimaginable scale released trillions of tons of carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere. Temperatures soared. The oceans lost their oxygen, suffocating marine life. Acid rain stripped forests to bare rock. From pole to equator, the planet became hostile to life. The textbook version is stark: almost everything died. Whatever survived did so by pure chance: burrowing animals, deep-sea creatures, and a few hardy plant species. Life, we are told, was nearly reset to zero. Civilization, of course, was still hundreds of millions of years away. But what if it wasn't? Hidden within the rock record of the Permian-Triassic boundary are anomalies that trouble this clean narrative. In South Africa's Karoo Basin, fossilized bones have been found with fine parallel grooves, marks that look eerily like they were made by cutting tools. These bones belong to creatures that lived before and after the extinction, suggesting that something or someone persisted through the chaos. In Antarctica, deep core samples from rock layers of the same age reveal traces of metals in concentrations far above what natural processes should produce. Mainstream explanations cite unusual volcanic chemistry, yet the distribution pattern suggests smelting or localized heating, processes typically associated with controlled fire, not random eruptions. Then there are the so-called ghost layers, thin bands in the strata where fossil diversity drops almost to nothing, but evidence of surface disturbance remains. In some cases, these layers contain angular fragments of stone embedded in ways that hint at deliberate quarrying. If these are natural formations, they are remarkably consistent across sites separated by thousands of miles. The hidden truth is unsettling: perhaps small enclaves of intelligent life, whether ancestral to us or something entirely different, found ways to endure in the shadows of the great dying. While the surface burned and oceans rotted, they may have retreated into the planet itself. Survival in such a world would have required more than luck. It would have meant foresight, predicting the disaster, engineering shelter, and preserving food, water, and genetic stock for decades or centuries. The volcanic winters alone would have plunged the planet into darkness for years. No primitive culture could have survived that without preparation. If the indestructible city existed at this time, the Permian cataclysm would have been its ultimate test. Every other trace of complex life was being erased. Only those who could isolate themselves completely, deep underground, beneath mountains, or in geothermal refuges, could endure. This idea is not without precedent in nature. Certain deep-sea ecosystems, powered entirely by geothermal vents, are immune to surface disasters. They thrive in chemical-rich darkness, cut off from the sun. If an advanced society had adapted similar principles on land, using geothermal heat, underground agriculture, and air filtration, they could have survived while the rest of the biosphere collapsed. Ancient myths curiously echo this possibility. Among the Hopi of North America, there is a legend of the ant people who sheltered humanity underground during a time when the surface world was unlivable. In Zoroastrian tradition, the god Ahura Mazda warns a prophet to build an underground refuge, the Verado, to preserve plants, animals, and humans against a deadly winter. These stories are separated by continents and cultures, yet they describe the same solution: survival beneath the earth during a global catastrophe. Mainstream anthropology treats these as symbolic or allegorical, but if they are echoes of events far older than human memory, passed down through cycles of survival, they may be the cultural residue of the Permian cataclysm itself. Even in modern geology, there are strange hints. In the Ural Mountains, cave systems contain deposits of a mineral composite unlike any formed naturally in the region: dense, uniform, and resistant to erosion. Dating is difficult, but some formations are embedded in rock layers close to the Permian boundary. To most, this is coincidence. To others, it is the faint fingerprint of construction in the age of extinction. The known history tells us the Great Dying was the closest Earth has ever come to becoming a dead planet. The hidden truth suggests it may also have been the crucible in which the indestructible city proved its worth. Imagine walking through its halls during that time. Outside, the sky is a burning orange haze, acid rain hissing against the sealed stone above. Inside, the air is clean, warmed by geothermal heat. Underground rivers provide water. Crops grow in chambers lit by engineered light. The population is small but stable. They know they cannot emerge for decades. They know the surface world will be unrecognizable when they return. Perhaps they emerge centuries later to find a planet rebooted, its old ecosystems gone, replaced by strange new life. Perhaps they abandon the surface entirely, deciding to remain hidden until the next cycle passed. Over millions of years, they may have learned that survival is not about conquering the earth, but about outlasting its rage. If that is true, then the Permian cataclysm was not just a disaster. It was proof that the city could endure anything, and that endurance would be tested again and again. Because as the world healed and new forms of life flourished, the planet was already moving toward its next great reset. The city would once more retreat, wait, and emerge, its history layered not in centuries, but in the unfathomable depth of geological time. Our next step takes us away from land entirely, to the planet's other great archive of secrets, a place where sunlight never reaches, and where some of the oldest structures may be hidden beneath crushing black water, the ocean's memory. On land, wind and rain erase ancient stories, mountains crumble, forests are consumed by fire, and cities vanish beneath dust. But in the deep ocean, far below the reach of storms, the past can linger, preserved in silt and stone for millions of years. Mainstream science views the ocean as a geological time capsule, a place where sediments accumulate slowly and steadily, recording changes in climate, chemistry, and life. Core samples taken from the seabed reveal microscopic fossils, chemical signatures, and traces of vanished species. These are the accepted pages of Earth's history, yet, in the deepest layers, there are whispers of something more: patterns too deliberate, alignments too precise, and anomalies that suggest more than the slow work of nature. The known record tells us that after the Permian cataclysm, life in the oceans rebounded slowly. Coral reefs vanished, replaced by strange microbial mats. Fish populations shrank to shadows of their former diversity. It took millions of years for the seas to become vibrant again. But in certain abyssal plains, flat expanses of the ocean floor, far from tectonic chaos, researchers have found formations that should not exist. Vast geometric ridges rise from otherwise featureless seabeds, their lines running parallel for hundreds of meters. To geologists, these are simply submarine dune fields, shaped by currents, but to others their sharp edges and repeating intervals hint at something built, not eroded. In the Mariana Trench, the deepest known point on Earth, remote submersibles have recorded what appear to be regular rectangular depressions arranged in rows. The official stance is that these are fractures caused by seismic activity, yet the spacing is unnervingly uniform, and the walls of the depressions show no signs of the chaotic breaks typical of earthquakes. The hidden truth may be that the city, or one of its counterparts, once lay beneath the waves, perhaps even built there intentionally. Consider the advantages. Deep-sea environments are stable, shielded from meteors, surface climate shifts, and even some volcanic effects. Hydrothermal vents provide heat and minerals. Pressure, though extreme, is constant and predictable. For a civilization advanced enough to adapt, the ocean's floor would be a fortress against extinction. Legends from disparate cultures seem to point toward this idea. The Greeks told of Atlantis, a great city swallowed by the sea. In Pacific Island traditions, there are stories of submerged kingdoms, places that sank not because of disaster, but because they were sent below to protect them from a surface catastrophe. Even in Norse myth, there are references to hidden realms beneath the whale road, a poetic phrase for the ocean. Science dismisses these as allegories for real-world events, like tsunamis or rising seas. Yet, if there truly was an indestructible city, its designers may have used the ocean as their refuge more than once. One of the most compelling pieces of physical evidence comes from the Bimini Road in the Bahamas, a submerged structure of massive stone blocks arranged in a near-linear formation. While conventional geologists label it a natural beachrock formation fractured by tides, divers have documented interlocking joints and right-angled cuts. If natural, it is one of the most precise accidents in geology. If artificial, it may be the eroded remnant of a coastal or submerged facility from a forgotten epoch. Then there's the Yonaguni Monument, off the coast of Japan, vast step terraces carved into solid rock, with flat plains, sharp corners, and columns that rise like the remains of a drowned temple. Critics argue it's a natural sandstone formation shaped by tectonics and currents. Yet certain features, such as what appears to be a stylized carving of an animal, are difficult to dismiss as entirely natural. In both cases, the mainstream explanation fits comfortably into the accepted narrative. But the alternative, that these are survivors or relics of an ancient oceanic network, would align with the idea of a city capable of surviving all 5 mass extinctions. Imagine what life would be like in such a deep-sea refuge. The walls would be reinforced to withstand crushing pressure. Light would come from engineered bioluminescence or energy captured from thermal vents. Food could be cultivated in hydroponic chambers or harvested from the mineral-rich ecosystems of the vents themselves. In the darkness, time would lose meaning. Years, decades, even centuries could pass without the inhabitants ever seeing the sun. This scenario also solves a puzzle. If the city truly survived across multiple extinction events, why is there so little trace of it on land? The ocean could have been both its hiding place and its vault. Each time the surface was remade by fire, ice, or impact, the deep remained untouched. Recent technological advances have given us the first real glimpses of these hidden worlds. Autonomous underwater vehicles, equipped with high-resolution sonar, have mapped patterns on the seafloor that do not match natural formations. Some appear as vast circular depressions with radiating spokes, too regular to be random. Others resemble roads or causeways, cutting across the seabed in straight lines. Officially, these anomalies are either not investigated further or attributed to unusual natural processes. Unofficially, there are whispers among some oceanographers that we are only scratching the surface of what lies beneath. The ocean's memory is long, but it is also guarded. At depths beyond 6,000 meters, pressures exceed 1,000 times atmospheric levels. Equipment fails. Communication links break. Exploration windows are brief and costly. The deeper we go, the harder it becomes to tell the difference between a natural marvel and a remnant of something built. If the city rests there, it may have survived not just one, but all 5 great extinctions, by withdrawing into the most stable and inaccessible environment Earth offered. And if so, its archives, untouched by the chaos above, may hold records not only of its own history, but of the entire biological saga of the planet. The known history sees the ocean as a stage for evolution, a source of life, and a victim of extinction events. The hidden truth may be that it is also the final refuge of those who refuse to die. As we leave the ocean's depths in our story, we move forward to another cataclysm, one that came not from the sea or volcanoes, but from the sky. An impact so violent, it marked the end of an entire dynasty of life, the age of the dinosaurs. The world was warm, warmer than it had been in tens of millions of years. From pole to pole, lush forests stretched across continents, and the shallow seas bloomed with life in unimaginable abundance. It was the Eocene through Miocene, an era often described by paleontologists as Earth's golden age for biodiversity. The scars of the Great Extinction had healed. Now the planet was teeming with life so massive, so strange, it bordered on myth. Known history explains this as the natural consequence of the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum (PETM) and the stable, greenhouse-like climate that followed. Without large ice caps, the poles were temperate and inviting. Rainforests spread into high latitudes. This created vast continuous habitats, allowing animals to grow larger and evolve rapidly in open, resource-rich environments. From the oceans rose leviathans like Basilosaurus, an elongated whale stretching nearly 20 meters, and giant sharks like Otodus megalodon, predators capable of swallowing seals whole. On land, rhino-like Parasatherium towered over the savannas, the largest land mammals ever to walk the earth. But hidden truth whispers of another influence, a guiding hand that may have deliberately cultivated this boom in megafauna. If the ancient abyssal city had survived 5 extinctions, they would have understood that a stable, warm climate presents a unique opportunity to build a biosphere of abundance. Giant predators, giant herbivores, and vast plant systems are not just beautiful, they can stabilize entire ecosystems, acting as keystone forces that regulate smaller species and keep balance over vast regions. Imagine the city's perspective. They had survived the asteroid, reshaped coastlines, and now had an opportunity to push evolution toward forms that could defend planetary stability for millions of years. Large-bodied animals are more resistant to short-term ecological shocks, and their movements shape landscapes. Elephants create clearings, whales fertilize the ocean, and giant predators prevent prey overpopulation. The city's archives, if they existed, might have contained blueprints for fostering such giants. The oceans of this era were a battlefield of titans. Megalodon hunted whales. Whales themselves grew increasingly formidable, some with bone-crushing teeth, others with sheer bulk as their defense. If the city still exerted influence, they may have seeded the seas with lineages designed to keep this balance intact. Yet such power came with danger. For the first time since the age of the dinosaurs, the city may have faced rivals that were not mindless forces of nature, but thinking predators. Fossil evidence hints that some prehistoric marine mammals displayed social hunting behaviors, coordinated attacks, strategic positioning, and even food sharing. These are traits we associate today with dolphins and orcas. If such intelligence began evolving millions of years, it is possible that certain lineages of marine mammals approached levels of cognition that the city itself would have recognized as dangerous. One speculative theory, whispered among fringe paleoanthropologists, suggests a brief intelligence bloom in some cetacean ancestors during the Miocenian experiment of evolution that either collapsed naturally or was ended. A mass die-off of certain marine predators around 10 million years ago remains puzzling. Mainstream science attributes it to cooling oceans and food chain disruption, but if the city had the capability to manipulate environments, this could have been an intentional removal, a preemptive strike against a species rising too fast. On land, the Warm Age saw the rise of colossal mammals in open grasslands. The giant herbivores, created landscapes of sweeping plains dotted with ancient river systems. Predators like amphibians, the bear dogs, stalked these herds, while saber-toothed cats began their long reign. From a surface perspective, these were evolutionary marvels. From the city's possible perspective, they were planetary regulators, tools to keep ecosystems resilient without constant intervention. But even as life thrived, the seeds of the next great change were already being sown. Tectonic shifts continued, slowly closing ancient seaways and altering ocean currents. The collision of continents was raising mountains that would change global wind patterns. The Antarctic circumpolar current, once blocked, began to form, isolating Antarctica and starting its long freeze. The warmth would not last forever. For the city, this transitional moment posed a strategic dilemma. Do you prepare for the coming cold, or take advantage of the current warmth to maximize biodiversity? If their archives carried the memory of prior mass extinctions, they might have known that giants fare poorly when climates shift quickly. Perhaps they began stockpiling genetic material during this era as insurance. Legends and myths that surface much later in human history contain strange echoes of this time, tales of giant beasts of the sea that ruled before humans came of age, keepers of the land whose size blotted out the sun, of the great thinning when the earth itself culled the mighty. Most cultures regard these as fantasy, yet paleontology confirms that giant predators and herbivores truly walked and swam the earth in this age, and that they vanished in dramatic declines before humans appeared. After the asteroid's fury had faded, the earth seemed to breathe again. Forests slowly reclaimed the charred land, rivers carved new courses through the ash, and the first waves of post-dinosaur life emerged, blinking into a world reborn. For a time it seemed the planet had been given a reprieve, but deep beneath the crust, another doom was stirring, one that had nothing to do with falling rocks from space. This time, the enemy was not from above, but from within. The known history tells us that around 252 million years ago, long before the asteroid that ended the dinosaurs, another cataclysm, far greater, had already taken place: the Permian, Triassic extinction, also called the Great Dying. Over 90% of marine life and 70% of land species vanished, leaving the Earth eerily silent. The culprit, scientists believe, was a massive and prolonged period of volcanic activity in what is now Siberia. The Siberian traps, vast, stepped plateaus of hardened lava, are the scars left by this ancient planetary wound. For hundreds of thousands of years, magma surged upward through fissures in the crust, spewing toxic gases into the air. Carbon dioxide and methane flooded the atmosphere, driving temperatures to lethal extremes. Oceans turned acidic, suffocating coral reefs and dissolving shells. On land, plants withered, and animals collapsed under skies of choking fumes. This was no single violent moment. It was a slow, relentless asphyxiation of the biosphere. The hidden truth, however, may run deeper. Literally, geological evidence hints that this volcanic episode may not have been entirely natural. The precise alignment of fissures, the unusual chemical signatures in some lava flows, and the sudden spikes in greenhouse gases all point to a trigger, something that set the catastrophe in motion almost like clockwork. Some researchers propose that deep mantle plumes, superheated columns of rock rising from the Earth's core, were responsible. Yet these plumes erupt at seemingly random times and places. Why then, in this moment of evolutionary flourishing, did one of the largest volcanic systems in history burst to life? If the city beneath the oceans had already existed by then, as previous sections suggest, then it would have been positioned perfectly to survive such a crisis. Living in geothermal-powered habitats, its inhabitants would have been immune to the poisonous skies and boiling seas above. The collapse of surface ecosystems might have been, to them, less of a tragedy and more of an opportunity. In this speculative framing, the eruption was not an accident of geology, but a calculated act. Perhaps the city's people, or whatever they were, had discovered a way to manipulate tectonic stresses, directing pressure to specific fault lines until the crust fractured. By doing so, they could engineer climate shifts on a planetary scale, wiping out species they deemed unfit and paving the way for new life forms. If that sounds impossible, consider what modern humans can do with far cruder tools. We can detonate nuclear weapons that cause artificial earthquakes, drill into magma chambers, and redirect rivers on a continental scale. Multiply such capabilities by millions of years of advancement, and the notion of controlled volcanism becomes less implausible. Legends preserved in disparate cultures may preserve faint memories of such events. In ancient Siberian shamanic traditions, there are tales of the fire below that consumed the land, sent by spirits dwelling beneath the seas. In Polynesian mythology, volcanic eruptions are sometimes attributed to keepers of the deep places who open the earth to cleanse it. Even the Hopi people of North America speak of worlds destroyed by both fire and flood before the current one began. Of course, these myths were recorded long after the Permian extinction, but if the city's influence spanned eons, then its possible fragments of memory traveled across generations and continents. The known history frames the Great Dying as a tragic accident of nature. The hidden truth might see it as an act of deep-time terraforming, shaping the biosphere in ways that served a long-term design. The survivors, as in all previous extinctions, were those most adaptable to change. Certain fish, amphibians, and small reptilian lineages clung to life in isolated refuges. In the oceans, deep-water species weathered the crisis far better than their shallow-water cousins, just as one might expect if someone down there knew where to shield them. And when the volcanic fires finally subsided, the planet entered the Triassic period, a blank evolutionary canvas. New reptiles evolved, some of which would later become dinosaurs. Plants diversified into unfamiliar forms. The entire architecture of life had been reset. The city, if it was real, would have watched this new world take shape from below, perhaps even nudging certain species along. This would not be intervention for mercy's sake, it would be selective breeding on a planetary scale, a gardener burning fields to prepare for new growth. Volcanism is both destroyer and creator. Lava buries the old world, but when it cools, it leaves behind some of the most fertile soils on Earth. In the wake of the Great Dying, life did not just return, it came back with unprecedented speed. This resilience is difficult to explain, given the magnitude of the disaster. Some scientists suggest microbial life played a crucial role in repairing the planet's chemistry. But if the city's inhabitants had mastered biology as well as geology, perhaps they seeded the recovery themselves. It is chilling to imagine them hidden far below, turning the planet's crust into both weapon and tool, knowing full well that every few 100 million years, another reset would be necessary. The Permian extinction was the most severe, but it would not be the last time the Earth's depths threatened life above. And as the city's watchers may have known, fire from within is far harder to predict or survive than fire from the sky. As the next chapter of Earth's history unfolded, a new kind of life began to dominate the land. The age of dinosaurs had begun in earnest, and for tens of millions of years, it seemed nothing could challenge them. But the city had already shown its willingness to intervene when evolution took a path they did not favor. The next mass extinction would come not from deep time's slow pressures, but from something far more sudden, something that might hint once again at a guiding hand. It began not with a bang, but with a suffocating stillness. No asteroid blazed across the sky, no volcanic towers split the horizon. Instead, the oceans, the very cradle of life, turned against their inhabitants in a slow, creeping apocalypse. In the fossil record, scientists call it an oceanic anoxic event, periods when vast stretches of the seas lose nearly all their oxygen. For marine life, it is the equivalent of the air turning to poison on land. Fish gasp at the surface, coral reefs bleach and crumble, the seafloor becomes a wasteland of black, stinking sludge. Entire food chains collapse, from plankton to apex predators. Known history tells us these events were often triggered by climate change. Warming oceans hold less oxygen, and the circulation that normally replenishes deep waters can grind to a halt. Sometimes volcanic outgassing or shifts in continental positions played a role, but the fossil evidence from one particular episode, during the late Cretaceous, roughly 94 million years ago, suggests something stranger. Layers of black shale from this period reveal not just low oxygen, but complete ocean stagnation in many regions, lasting hundreds of thousands of years. The diversity of marine species plummeted, while certain hardy bacteria, capable of living without oxygen, spread in massive blooms. These bacteria produced hydrogen sulfide, a toxic gas that, if released to the surface in sufficient quantities, could poison the atmosphere itself. The hidden truth theory is unsettling. What if this was no accident of currents and climate, but an intentional act of biological warfare on a planetary scale? If our theorized ancient city still thrived in its abyssal domains, the oceans were its natural stronghold. It's not difficult to imagine that they would be able to manipulate them, either to defend against a threat from above or to cleanse the seas of unwanted competition. An anoxic event would be a perfect weapon, invisible, slow-moving, and devastating. No sudden impact to draw attention, no towering eruption to warn survivors, only a gradual tightening of the noose until most surface-dwelling ocean species were gone. Consider how modern humans already cause dead zones with nothing more than agricultural runoff. Nutrient-rich water fuels explosive algal growth, which depletes oxygen as the algae decompose. Now imagine a civilization with the ability to seed vast algal blooms intentionally in targeted ocean basins and to sustain them for centuries. Some paleoceanographers have noted peculiar spikes in certain trace elements, molybdenum, uranium, vanadium, in Cretaceous sediments. These metals are enriched in anoxic environments, but the scale of their concentration suggests a rapid onset, not a slow natural drift. In other words, something switched the oceans over in geologic terms and kept them that way. Ancient myths may carry faint echoes of such times. The Greeks told of Okeanos, the endless world-encircling river, as both giver and taker of life. The Polynesians spoke of a black water that sometimes rose from the deep, killing fish and fouling the shore. In Norse myth, the serpent Jormungandr lies beneath the waves, waiting to poison the seas when the end of days arrives. These tales, born in vastly different places, converge on a singular fear: the ocean itself can turn hostile. What makes the Cretaceous anoxic event so suspicious in this speculative frame is what followed. When the seas finally began to recover, the ecosystems that emerged were radically different. Many groups of marine reptiles, plesiosaurs, ichthyosaurs, had been pushed to the brink. Large predatory fish vanished entirely. In their place, new species rose to dominance, including some that would thrive right up until the asteroid impact. 30 million years later, if the city engineered this reset, it might have been preparing for a world where certain species, ones they favored or perhaps genetically influenced, would flourish without competition. Its selective survival, written across an entire ocean basin. One of the strangest implications comes from deep-sea vent communities. Fossil evidence shows that these ecosystems, far from sunlight and reliant on chemosynthetic bacteria, barely noticed the anoxic crisis that ravaged the rest of the ocean. It's as if the event had been designed to spare the very habitats in which the city may have dwelled. While shallow waters turned into death traps, the deep abyssal plains and volcanic vent fields remained relatively stable, like sanctuaries behind an invisible wall. From a surface world perspective, an anoxic event is a disaster beyond measure. From the point of view of the city, it could be a controlled burn, wiping the oceanic slate clean while leaving their own strongholds untouched. And yet, even in the darkest stretches of these events, life clung to the edges of survival. Certain hardy species, sharks, ammonites, small bony fish, managed to adapt. Over the long centuries, oxygen slowly returned, currents reawakened, and the blue oceans of Earth came back to life. But they came back different. The most disturbing part of this hidden truth theory is that the surface life never even knew it was under attack. To them, the seas simply changed. In the fossil record, these events appear as black bands of sediment, but they tell no stories of intent, only consequence. For the city, however, the lesson was clear. Mass extinction need not be loud to be effective. Silence could be just as deadly as fire. As the late Cretaceous rolled on, the dinosaurs above enjoyed their golden age, unaware that their reign was measured in tens of millions of years, not hundreds. Below, the city waited. They had unleashed fire from the sky, fire from the deep, and now the invisible choke of the oceans themselves. Each method had reshaped life. Each had demonstrated the same pattern: remove the old, prepare the way for the new. But their next move would be their boldest, and perhaps most dangerous yet. For when the next extinction came, it would be sudden, spectacular, and remembered in legend forever. The stage was set for the most famous cataclysm in Earth's history. 66 million years ago, in what is now the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, the sky split open. A mountain-sized asteroid, more than 6 miles across, plunged into Earth's atmosphere at a speed of over 40,000 miles per hour. In the space of a heartbeat, it slammed into shallow tropical seas, releasing an energy equivalent to billions of nuclear bombs. This is the story everyone knows: the Chicxulub impact, the cataclysm that brought the age of dinosaurs to an end. Shock waves rippled around the globe, megatsunamis towered over coastlines, rock vaporized into plasma. A column of molten debris shot into space before raining back down as a deadly curtain of fire. Within hours, much of the planet's surface was ablaze. Known history tells us this was an act of cosmic chance, random, unpreventable, and merciless. But some researchers have noted patterns that raise a troubling question: was this disaster entirely an accident of orbital mechanics? Or was something, or someone, waiting for the right moment to strike? Hidden in the details is a timing so precise, it borders on suspicious. The asteroid didn't just end the dinosaurs' reign. It came at the height of their global dominance, when their numbers were vast, their ecosystems stable, and their evolutionary momentum strong. For a civilization living in the shadows, like our theorized abyssal city, waiting for such a peak before delivering a fatal blow would be the ultimate strategic move. The impactor itself may hold clues. Studies of its composition suggest it was a carbonaceous chondrite, a type of asteroid rich in water and organic compounds. These are not the most common near-Earth objects, yet this one struck with pinpoint precision. Some astronomers have speculated that gravitational nudges from Jupiter or resonances in the asteroid belt could have set it on a collision course. But in the hidden truth, framing those nudges could just as easily have been engineered. If the city possessed the technology to influence gravitational paths, perhaps via large-scale energy emissions or manipulation of mass, they could have steered an asteroid subtly over millennia toward a chosen impact point. The shallow seas over the Yucatan would have been ideal. They would amplify the vaporization of water, pumping enormous amounts of steam and sulfate aerosols into the atmosphere, accelerating the global winter to come. In myth, we find strange reflections of a fire from the sky. The Aztec sun stone depicts cycles of world destruction, one of which ends in a rain of fire. Hindu texts speak of weapons capable of burning the world in an instant, hurling flames from the heavens. Norse sagas tell of Surtur, the fire giant, who will set the world aflame at Ragnarok. Such legends may be cultural memories, retold through the lens of divine wrath, a day when the sky itself became a weapon. The hours and days after the Chicxulub impact were apocalyptic. Dust and pulverized rock choked the atmosphere, blocking sunlight. Global temperatures plunged, photosynthesis collapsed, starving plant life, which in turn starved herbivores and then carnivores. Acid rain scoured forests and poisoned rivers. In the oceans, food chains unraveled as plankton populations crashed. Yet, amidst the extinction, certain life forms endured. And this is where the hidden truth sharpens. Crocodilians, turtles, small mammals and certain birds survived. Deep-sea vent communities, far removed from the sun's warmth, went on almost unchanged. Once again, the survivors mirrored the ecological niches the abyssal city might have favored or protected. If we imagine this as a calculated strike, the Chicxulub impact was not a random blow, but the final pruning of a biosphere the city had been shaping for millions of years. Previous extinctions had cleared oceans, altered climates, and shifted dominance among species. This one eliminated the most visible and powerful megafauna on land, paving the way for the rise of mammals and eventually humans. What makes the hidden truth possibility most chilling is the scale of patience it implies. Engineering an asteroid's path over geological time, timing its strike to coincide with a planetary ecological peak, and ensuring the survival of select ecosystems. This is not the work of a species thinking in decades or centuries. This is the thinking of a civilization playing an eon-long game. Some researchers have pointed to smaller precursor impacts in the fossil records, smaller craters dating to just before the Chicxulub strike, as possible signs of testing. These earlier impacts may have been natural, or they may have been trials calibrating trajectory and effect. If the city had remained hidden beneath the oceans, watching as surface life clawed its way through the aftermath, they would have witnessed an emptying of ecological niches on land. Mammals, small and adaptable, surged forward. Primates appeared. Intelligence, of the kind that could one day rival their own, began to flicker in the forests. This raises the most unsettling question of all. Did the city foresee us? Were we in some unfathomable way the intended product of this sequence of extinctions? Or were we an unforeseen variable, an accidental outcome of their reshaping of Earth's life? By the time the skies cleared and the world warmed again, the dinosaurs, save for the ancestors of modern birds, were gone. The age of reptiles had ended. The age of mammals had begun. The Chicxulub event stands as the most famous mass extinction in popular imagination, but to the city, if our hidden truth theory holds, it may have been merely phase 4 of a grander design, a design that had already survived 3 previous global purges and 1 silent oceanic chokehold. The next phase, however, would bring a new challenge. Unlike the other mass extinctions, the next great upheaval would not be triggered by impacts, eruptions, or anoxic seas. It would come from within the planet itself, in the form of an ice-bound siege that tested even the city's endurance. The fire from the sky had cleansed the land, now the cold would come for the world. In the wake of the Chicxulub impact, sunlight struggled to pierce the thick shroud of dust, soot, and aerosols that encircled the globe. Temperatures plummeted. Photosynthesis stalled. For years, some say decades, Earth remained trapped in a deep chill, a darkness more complete than any night the planet had ever known. The known history tells us this was an inevitable result of physics. The impact threw trillions of tons of material into the stratosphere, blocking the sun's energy. Global ecosystems, already crippled by fire, now faced starvation. The oceans cooled, ice advanced from the poles, and the survivors of the firestorm clung to whatever warmth they could find. But the hidden truth hints at something else. There are signs in the geological record that the cooling may have been drawn out, sustained longer than the immediate effects of the impact alone could explain. Sulfate layers in Antarctic ice cores suggest not a single pulse of aerosols but a series of them, arriving in waves over several decades. Was this simply the aftershock of global wildfires and volcanism, or could it have been maintenance? If the abyssal city had truly sought to reshape the biosphere, the post-impact chill would have been their opportunity to tighten control. By releasing controlled amounts of aerosols into the atmosphere, possibly through submarine volcanic manipulation or even direct atmospheric injection, they could have ensured the Earth remained under their desired conditions long enough for targeted species to disappear completely. The effect was merciless. Tropical forests withered into skeletal groves, coral reefs collapsed into barren wastelands. In the far north and south, advancing ice sheets claimed more territory each year. Life retreated to refuges, oases of habitability scattered across the globe. On land, small mammals and hardy birds scratched out a living in sheltered valleys and along coasts where ocean currents still delivered warmth. In the seas, the abyssal depths, insulated from surface chaos, thrived in eerie stability. Hydrothermal vent systems became lifeboats for countless species, lifeboats that the city may have safeguarded with almost parental care. And yet, this period was not merely one of survival, it was one of quiet advantage. In darkness and cold, surface species shrank, adapted, or died. But in the deep, the city's domain was untouched. Their agriculture, if it relied on geothermal warmth, would have continued without interruption. Their power sources, perhaps driven by the same volcanic forces that heat vent systems, would have burned as steadily as ever. The rest of the planet's biosphere was on pause, theirs kept moving forward. Legends that echo from human prehistory speak of an age of ice when the sun slept. Inuit oral traditions recall a time when darkness lasted for generations. Australian Aboriginal stories, passed down for tens of thousands of years, describe a death frost that came from the sky. Even in equatorial cultures, there are tales of a white hunger that killed the trees and silenced the rivers. Such stories may preserve the distant memory of a long, unnatural winter. Scientists studying the post-impact period estimate that between 50 and 75% of all species vanished. But here is the strange part: in certain ecological niches, particularly those connected to deep water systems, the diversity remained oddly stable. It's as if those ecosystems were insulated not just from the catastrophe, but from the knock-on effects that typically ripple outward after such an event. Was this simple luck, or was it management? One could imagine the city sending out expeditions during this time, not to the frozen surface, but across the ocean floor, relocating vulnerable species to controlled sanctuary. If they possessed genetic libraries, they might even have reseeded certain regions when conditions improved. The contrast framing here is stark. Known history, the post-impact winter, was an inevitable consequence of dust and aerosols lingering in the atmosphere. Species survived or perished by chance, guided only by natural selection. Hidden truth: the winter was prolonged, manipulated, and used as a selective filter by an ancient intelligence that had already survived 3 previous extinction events. For human ancestors, this winter lay far beyond their timeline, yet it shaped the path to our eventual emergence. By stripping away dominant reptilian megafauna and keeping the climate unstable for centuries, it may have created the conditions for mammals to diversify rapidly once warmth returned. But in the cold, there is also risk. Ice ages, even miniatures like this, can trap heat in the deep, slowing ocean currents, changing chemistry, and threatening even abyssal ecosystems. The city would not have been immune to these shifts. Their adaptations to previous ocean anoxia might have served them well here, but prolonged cooling could have forced them into active intervention to keep their own systems viable. One unsettling possibility is that the city may have used the post-impact cold as a cover for expansion. While surface predators vanished, they could have established new undersea outposts, colonizing regions that had previously been defended by hostile life. The silence above may have been matched by a quiet construction boom below. Eventually, the atmosphere began to clear. Sunlight returned, filtered through a thin haze. Plants tentatively pushed green shoots toward the light. Insects buzzed again in warming forests. Coral reefs began a slow, painful recovery. The ice retreated, but the biosphere that emerged was not the same. Gone were the great reptilian lords of the Cretaceous. In their place, mammals began their ascendancy, small, warm-blooded, and adaptable. The hidden truth framing sees this as no accident. The world had been prepared for them, cleared climate tilted in their favor, and the city watched. If their goal was the long-term shaping of life toward a particular outcome, the post-impact winter had been their most decisive victory yet. They had survived fire, ice, and darkness. They had erased competitors, strengthened allies, and ensured their own insulation from catastrophe. The next phase of Earth's history would bring warmth, diversity, and a flowering of life. But it would also bring competition, new predators, new prey, and eventually a species with an unsettling resemblance to themselves in its curiosity, adaptability, and hunger for expansion. For now, though, the ice was retreating, the great siege was over. But somewhere in the abyss, the architects of survival were already preparing for the next shift in the game. The great winter had ended, but the world was not simply returning to what it had been. The continents were shifting, seas retreating from some coasts while flooding others. In the millions of years that followed the Chicxulub impact, Earth's surface entered a phase of quiet but profound transformation, one in which the balance between ocean and land subtly tilted, creating new opportunities and erasing old worlds. Known history tells us this was the result of plate tectonics and glaciostatic change. As ice retreated, water levels rose, flooding lowlands and creating warm, shallow seas. Elsewhere, tectonic uplift raised seabeds into new continents, pushing ancient coastlines hundreds of kilometers inland. Mountain ranges rose where continents collided. Islands formed in the wake of volcanic activity. In short, geology was doing what geology always does, slow, patient work that shapes the biosphere over millions of years. But hidden truth may tell a different story. There are anomalies in the geological record, abrupt uplifts that occurred not over millions of years, but in sudden pulses. Vast stretches of seabed seem to have been raised in geologically instant periods, on the order of tens of thousands of years, lightning fast by tectonic standards. Could some of these shifts have been engineered if the abyssal city possessed the ability to manipulate geothermal flows, perhaps by harnessing deep mantle plumes or redirecting tectonic stress along fault lines? They might have been able to deliberately alter coastlines. Such an act could serve many purposes, expanding habitable continental shelves for certain land species they favored, exposing new land bridges to facilitate migration, or cutting them to isolate regions, creating shallow seas to boost marine productivity near strategic locations. The new landscapes brought life surging back in spectacular waves. Vast plains appeared, draped in ferns and flowering plants. Rivers carved fresh valleys, creating fertile floodplains. The warm Eocene seas teemed with life. Whales began their first evolutionary steps. Tropical reefs spread across thousands of kilometers, and lush forests climbed to the very edges of the Arctic Circle. The contrast framing here is striking. Known history, the rising and falling of land and sea, was a purely natural process, driven by ice melt, mantle convection, and continental drift. Hidden truth, the city may have guided these changes with surgical precision, reshaping coastlines like a gardener pruning a tree. Consider the archaeological mystery of certain continental shelf formations, stone ridges and patterned seabed features that lie far below current sea levels, yet show signs of deliberate alignment. Some marine geologists dismiss them as unusual erosion patterns or reef formations. Others quietly note their geometric precision. If these features date to the post-impact recovery period, they could represent infrastructure, either remnants of cities that had been abandoned as the sea rose, or installations built to influence currents, tides, and even tectonic strain. Legends from many coastal cultures speak of lands that rose from the sea, or kingdoms that sank beneath the waves. Usually these stories are attributed to floods or earthquakes, but what if some of them are distorted memories of the same events, observed from different places in different ages? The Polynesians tell of Hawaii, a homeland that vanished. The Celts spoke of Lyonesse, swallowed by the sea in a single night. Even in South America, there are tales of land rising suddenly, creating new mountains where there had been ocean. For human ancestors, still millions of years from walking upright, these events would have been irrelevant, yet they shaped the stage on which our species would eventually emerge. New ecosystems formed on the rising lands, isolating pockets of species that would evolve into entirely new forms. The expansion of shallow seas brought explosions of marine biodiversity, which in turn stabilized ocean food chains. From the city's perspective, these shifts could have been a form of biosphere engineering, not just survival but optimization. The recovery from a mass extinction is chaotic. Ecosystems crash and rebound unpredictably. By subtly altering geography, they could influence which ecosystems would dominate, reducing randomness and increasing predictability in evolution's outcomes. One could even imagine them seeding certain newly emerged coastlines with life from their own genetic archives. In this scenario, the first communities to colonize a fresh volcanic island or a newly exposed continental shelf might not be entirely native. They could be curated. This period also coincided with a climatic optimum, a warm, humid global climate with minimal ice caps. Such conditions would have been ideal for spreading life quickly, but also for accelerating evolutionary pressure. Warm, shallow seas produce more oxygen and nutrients, fueling bursts of adaptive radiation. Land animals and plants spread rapidly across the expanding territories. And yet, the warmth carried risks. Global currents changed, deep-sea oxygenation patterns shifted, and in some regions, large-scale anoxia, oxylocanine loss returned. Geological evidence from this time shows black shale deposits, sediment layers rich in organic matter, formed when vast portions of the ocean floor went oxygen poor. If these events were naturally occurring, the city might have worked to mitigate their effects in areas they valued most. If unnatural, they may have been a deliberate attempt to reset certain ocean ecosystems yet again. What makes this era so haunting is its combination of beauty and danger. The planet was alive with color, forests dripping with strange flowers, skies filled with new species of birds, seas flashing with the scales of countless fish. But beneath it all lay a guiding hand. If the city truly existed, then they were no longer mere survivors. They had become sculptors. The transition forward is inevitable. As the continents rose and climates warmed, the stage was being set for a new series of evolutionary experiments. Among them would be lineages that would eventually give rise to the apex predators of the Miocene seas, the vast grasslands of the Pliocene, and far in the future, the first tool-making apes. For the city, this was a period of strategic patience. Their work was long-term. They could afford to wait for the results, and perhaps, somewhere in the depths, they were already making plans for the next cycle, because if Earth's history had taught them anything, it was that no stability lasts forever. The world was warm, warmer than it had been in tens of millions of years. From pole to pole, lush forests stretched across continents, and the shallow seas bloomed with life in unimaginable abundance. It was the Eocene through Miocene, an era often described by paleontologists as Earth's golden age for biodiversity. The scars of the great extinction had healed. Now the planet was teeming with life so massive, so strange, it bordered on myth. Known history explains this as the natural consequence of the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum (PM) and the stable, greenhouse-like climate that followed. Without large ice caps, the poles were temperate and inviting. Rainforests spread into high latitudes. This created vast, continuous habitats, allowing animals to grow larger and evolve rapidly in open, resource-rich environments. From the oceans rose leviathans like Basilosaurus, an elongated whale stretching nearly 20 meters, and giant sharks like Otodus megalodon, predators capable of swallowing seals whole. On land, rhino-like Paraceratherium towered over the savannas, the largest land mammals ever to walk the earth. But hidden truth whispers of another influence, a guiding hand that may have deliberately cultivated this boom in megafauna. If the ancient abyssal city had survived 5 extinctions, they would have understood that a stable, warm climate presents a unique opportunity to build a biosphere of abundance. Giant predators, giant herbivores, and vast plant systems are not just beautiful, they can stabilize entire ecosystems, acting as keystone forces that regulate smaller species and keep balance over vast regions. Imagine the city's perspective. They had survived the asteroid, reshaped coastlines, and now had an opportunity to push evolution toward forms that could defend planetary stability for millions of years. Large-bodied animals are more resistant to short-term ecological shocks, and their movements shape landscapes. Elephants create clearings, whales fertilize the ocean, and giant predators prevent prey overpopulation. The city's archives, if they existed, might have contained blueprints for fostering such giants. The oceans of this era were a battlefield of titans. Megalodon hunted whales. Whales themselves grew increasingly formidable, some with bone-crushing teeth, others with sheer bulk as their defense. If the city still exerted influence, they may have seeded the seas with lineages designed to keep this balance intact. Yet such power came with danger. For the first time since the age of the dinosaurs, the city may have faced rivals that were not mindless forces of nature, but thinking predators. Fossil evidence hints that some prehistoric marine mammals displayed social hunting behaviors, coordinated attacks, strategic positioning, and even food sharing. These are traits we associate today with dolphins and orcas. If such intelligence began evolving millions of years earlier, it is possible that certain lineages of marine mammals approached levels of cognition that the city itself would have recognized as dangerous. One speculative theory, whispered among fringe paleoanthropologists, suggests a brief intelligence bloom in some cetacean ancestors during the Miocenian experiment of evolution that either collapsed naturally or was ended. A mass die-off of certain marine predators around 10 million years ago remains puzzling. Mainstream science attributes it to cooling oceans and food chain disruption, but if the city had the capability to manipulate environments, this could have been an intentional removal, a preemptive strike against a species rising too fast. On land, the Warm Age saw the rise of colossal mammals in open grasslands. The giant herbivores created landscapes of sweeping plains dotted with ancient river systems. Predators like Amphision, the beardogs, stalked these herds, while saber-toothed cats began their long reign. From a surface perspective, these were evolutionary marvels. From the city's possible perspective, they were planetary regulators, tools to keep ecosystems resilient without constant intervention. But even as life thrived, the seeds of the next great change were already being sown. Tectonic shifts continued, slowly closing ancient seaways and altering ocean currents. The collision of continents was raising mountains that would change global wind patterns. The Antarctic circumpolar current, once blocked, began to form, isolating Antarctica and starting its long freeze. The warmth would not last forever. For the city, this transitional moment posed a strategic dilemma. Do you prepare for the coming cold, or take advantage of the current warmth to maximize biodiversity? If their archives carried the memory of prior mass extinctions, they might have known that giants fare poorly when climates shift quickly. Perhaps they began stockpiling genetic material during this era as insurance. Legends and myths that surface much later in human history contain strange echoes of this time, tales of giant beasts of the sea that ruled before humans came of age, keepers of the land whose size blotted out the sun, of the great thinning, when the earth itself culled the mighty. Most cultures regard these as fantasy, yet paleontology confirms that giant predators and herbivores truly walked and swam the earth in this age, and that they vanished in dramatic declines before humans appeared. The warmth faded slowly at first, almost imperceptibly. Seasons grew sharper, rainfall patterns shifted, and the lush forests that once blanketed the high latitudes began to thin. What had been a world of perpetual abundance started to fracture into patchworks of green and brown. In the deep time of Earth's history, this was the beginning of a new chapter, the Oligocene, and onward into the early Pliocene, when cooling oceans and growing ice sheets began reshaping life on a global scale. Known history records this transformation as the natural result of shifting continents and altered ocean currents. Antarctica drifted fully into isolation, surrounded by the newly formed Antarctic Circumpolar Current. This relentless flow of frigid water cut the continent off from warmer seas, locking it under ice. Mountain ranges rose higher elsewhere, the Himalayas, the Rockies, altering wind patterns and redirecting monsoon systems. The cooling didn't just lower temperatures, it rewrote the rules of survival for the city beneath the waves. If it still endured after surviving 5 mass extinctions, this was not merely a change in climate, it was a signal. They had seen it before, warmth giving way to cold, abundance giving way to scarcity, and giants, those titanic creatures of the warm age, beginning to vanish. Their deep archives, built from eons of observation, may have told them that when cooling comes, extinction follows swiftly for species too specialized for warmth. The question was not whether the giants would fall, but how to prepare for what would take their place. The first casualties were often the largest. The great herbivores that once roamed in herds the size of small nations began to disappear as grasslands dried and fragmented. Their predators followed soon after. In the oceans, vast schools of warm-water fish dwindled, and the marine leviathans that hunted them faced starvation. Fossil records show clear lines of decline. Once dominant megafauna reduced to scattered smaller populations before disappearing altogether. Mainstream science explains these collapses through habitat loss, falling sea levels, and the cooling of once productive shallow seas. Yet the hidden truth may be that some extinctions were not merely passive consequences of climate, but active culling. If the city's role was to maintain planetary stability, then allowing certain giants to linger into the cold might have destabilized future ecosystems. It may have been necessary, though perhaps morally troubling, to hasten their disappearance. This was also a time of innovation in life's design. Cooling climates favored smaller, more adaptable species, animals with faster reproductive cycles, more diverse diets, and greater mobility. Mammals and birds began to dominate in new ways, filling niches left vacant by giants. For the city, this was both an opportunity and a challenge. Smaller apex species could adapt quickly to change, but they could also disrupt balance faster. If left unchecked, they could become invasive forces that destabilized entire regions. From the perspective of surface evolution, this was a golden age of adaptability. Rodents spread into every available niche. Early canids began their slow march toward becoming wolves, coyotes, and foxes. Primates diversified, with some lineages moving from dense forests into more open environments, an important step toward eventual human evolution. On the ground, grasslands expanded dramatically, replacing ancient forests with endless plains where speed became a survival tool. For the city below, these shifts may have been monitored in exquisite detail. Their instruments, whether biological, mechanical, or something stranger, could have tracked migrations, climate anomalies, and even genetic mutations. Cooling periods are, after all, crucibles of innovation. The city may have taken advantage of the cold to seed traits that would serve future stability, endurance, cooperation, and intelligence. These traits would prove crucial in the coming ages when environmental instability became the new norm. Yet cooling also brought new hazards. Expanding polar ice increased planetary albedo, reflecting more sunlight and deepening the chill. Falling sea levels exposed continental shelves, erasing vast coastal habitats that had been nurseries for marine life. Dust from newly formed deserts spread across oceans, changing nutrient cycles. In a sense, the whole planet was becoming more edged, more extreme in its seasonal contrasts, more punishing to life unprepared for change. The contrast framing is clear. Known history, cooling was a gradual, natural process driven by tectonics and orbital shifts, forcing species to adapt or die. Hidden truth, cooling may have been guided, its pace subtly accelerated or decelerated to create a controlled collapse of giant-dominated ecosystems, clearing the board for a new era of adaptable species that could weather harsher conditions. For humanity's distant ancestors, though still tiny primates in scattered tropical zones, this cooling would eventually open doors. Forest fragmentation forced some to travel between tree patches, experimenting with ground-based movement. This early push toward bipedalism, still millions of years from completion, was rooted in the same climatic changes that spelled the end for much of the Warm Age's megafauna. If the city had a hand in this, it was a gamble. Smaller, more intelligent species could one day rise to rival even them. Legends that survive in human oral traditions may faintly echo these times. Stories of the ice that crept, or the wind that cut through mountains, sometimes pair with tales of small but clever creatures rising after the fall of giants. While folklore is an unreliable time capsule, the parallels to paleoclimate events are uncanny. Perhaps such memories were seeded intentionally, a genetic or cultural breadcrumb trail, for when the city's work was finally done. From a cinematic perspective, this is the image: colossal ice sheets grinding across newly barren land, vast herds reduced to scattered survivors, predators growing lean and desperate. In the deep, a civilization older than continents watches with both calculation and apprehension. The cold is not an enemy, it is a sculptor carving the future, but every sculptor risks breaking the stone entirely if the chisel strikes too hard. As the Oligocene cooled into the Miocene, and then edged toward the Pliocene, the planet's rhythms shifted again. Periods of warmth and cold began to alternate more rapidly, a pattern that would eventually become the Ice Age cycles. This instability created evolutionary pressure like never before, pushing life to adapt in mere tens of thousands of years instead of millions. The city, if still present, would have recognized this as both a threat and an opportunity, the final preparation for an age when adaptability would matter more than sheer strength. The transition forward is inevitable. The cooling will not stop here. It will sharpen into an era of deep freezes and short, unstable warm periods, and in that instability, something unexpected will begin to rise, not just adaptable predators, but adaptable thinkers. The city will need to decide whether to nurture this new intelligence or ensure it never reaches its full potential. The world tilted further into instability. What had once been a gradual cooling now fractured into violent swings between deep freezes and fleeting warm spells. Glaciers advanced like slow-moving armies, carving valleys, crushing forests, and locking oceans in vast prisons of ice. Then, almost without warning, the ice would retreat, flooding lowlands and releasing torrents of meltwater that reshaped coastlines. This was the Pleistocene epoch, a time when the Earth became a pendulum, swinging between extremes every few tens of thousands of years. Known history portrays the ice ages as products of Milankovitch cycles, subtle variations in Earth's orbit and tilt that change the amount and distribution of sunlight reaching the planet's surface. The geological record supports this: layers of glacial deposits alternating with warmer sediments, fossilized pollen showing rapid shifts in vegetation, and isotopic evidence of fluctuating ocean temperatures. But the hidden truth may be far stranger. These cycles, while natural in origin, may have been harnessed, amplified, or even strategically delayed by forces beyond surface comprehension. If the city beneath the sea had survived 5 extinction events, it likely understood the patterns of celestial mechanics better than any human civilization. It may have learned to tune them, nudging the planet into conditions that would refine life toward greater adaptability. The Pleistocene cycles were ruthless. In glacial periods, ice sheets covered much of North America, Europe, and Asia. Sea levels dropped by more than 100 meters, exposing vast coastal plains that connected continents. During these times, life clustered into refugia, small pockets of habitable land and sea where conditions remained bearable. In interglacial periods, warmth returned with deceptive generosity, allowing species to expand rapidly, only for the ice to reclaim its territory once more. For megafauna, these cycles were a deadly test. The Pleistocene gave rise to titanic creatures: woolly mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, and short-faced bears. They were superbly adapted to cold, but not to the speed of change. Each glacial retreat reduced their advantage, shrinking the grasslands they relied on, while warmer adapted species nipped at their heels. In the known historical view, their extinction was a mix of climate stress and human hunting. But the hidden possibility is more unnerving: that their disappearance was accelerated intentionally, to open ecological space for smaller, faster breeding species. Humans were among those smaller, faster breeding species. By the mid-Pleistocene, our ancestors had already begun to shape tools, control fire, and migrate into harsh environments once thought uninhabitable. The ice did not scare them, it forged them. Survival in shifting climates demanded planning, cooperation, and innovation. Each glacial pulse was like a crucible, burning away the unadaptable and tempering the rest into something harder, sharper, and more cunning. From the perspective of the city, this rise of intelligence was unprecedented. Life had become clever before: cephalopods in ancient oceans, certain birds in the warm age, but no species had combined tool-making, complex language, and cooperative strategy in this way. The ice ages did not just test humanity, they selected for the very traits that would one day make us a threat or an ally. If the city was guiding evolution, then perhaps it had made a dangerous choice without fully understanding the consequences. In cinematic terms, picture it: endless white horizons under pale blue skies, herds of mammoths moving like shadows across frozen plains, human tribes huddled around flickering fires in caves, while deep beneath the ocean's frozen edge, a civilization watches through devices that can see across continents. The ice above is not just weather, it is a tool, a scalpel, carving the genetic future of the planet. The contrast framing here is sharp. Known history: the Pleistocene was a natural geologic epoch of recurring ice ages, shaping ecosystems and driving human evolution through environmental stress. Hidden truth: the ice ages may have been carefully calibrated, using planetary feedback systems to push species, including humans, toward maximum adaptability, ensuring that only the most resourceful would inherit the future. The Pleistocene also reshaped the planet's geography in ways that would define human history. Land bridges appeared and vanished. The Bering Land Bridge connected Asia and North America. The Sunda Shelf linked Southeast Asia to the islands of Indonesia. These shifting corridors allowed humans and animals to spread into new territories, often bringing competition, predation, and disease into previously isolated populations. In the city's calculus, this cross-pollination of life could have been a deliberate stress test, forcing adaptation through sudden encounters. Yet instability is a double-edged blade. While the ice forged resilience, it also increased the chances of total collapse. If the city was indeed nudging the planet, it had to walk a dangerous line. Too much cold, and even adaptable species could vanish. Too little, and the crucible would fail to produce the desired results. Some interglacial periods may have been extended artificially, buying time for key species, particularly humans, to develop new survival strategies before the next freeze. There is also the question of memory. Human myths from across the globe speak of ages of ice, times when the sun was weak and worlds locked in white death. But more intriguingly, some myths also speak of watchers beneath the water, or beings who command the seasons. Could fragments of knowledge from the city have filtered upward during brief points of contact, misunderstood by early humans as divine intervention? By the end of the Pleistocene, the Ice Age pendulum reached its most dramatic swing. The last glacial maximum, around 20,000 years ago, saw ice sheets at their greatest extent, and then abruptly, the world began to warm. This was not a gentle thaw, but a rapid shift, one of the fastest climate changes in geological history. Sea levels rose, ice retreated, and entire ecosystems were drowned or displaced. The giants of the Ice Age fell quickly in this new world, their specialized cold weather adaptations now useless. Humans, by contrast, surged forward into the vacuum they left behind. Whether this warming was entirely natural or partly engineered remains the great question. The city may have seen this as the final step in its long experiment to place the planet in the hands of a species forged by ice, tempered by scarcity, and ready to face the next great upheaval. But if that was their plan, they may not have anticipated how quickly this new dominant species would begin rewriting the world in its own image. The transition forward is inevitable. The ice is gone, the seas are rising, and human civilization is about to explode in scale and ambition. For the first time since its creation, the city will face a rival species capable not just of surviving its designs, but of discovering them. The ice began to retreat, not with the slow patience of geological time, but with a startling, almost violent haste. Around 14,700 years ago, the planet entered the Bullingallard interstadial, a sudden warming phase that caught many species off guard. Glaciers that had stood immovable for millennia shrank back in decades. Rivers swelled beyond their banks, carving new paths through the land. Vast proglacial lakes burst their icy dams, unleashing floods so massive they scoured entire regions clean of life. In the known scientific narrative, this warming was part of Earth's natural deglaciation cycle. Shifts in the planet's orbit and axial tilt altered the distribution of solar energy, amplified by feedback loops involving greenhouse gases released from melting permafrost. But there's a darker hidden truth possibility, that this warming was not entirely natural. If the city beneath the ocean had been orchestrating climatic conditions for tens of thousands of years, this rapid thaw may have been its most decisive and deliberate intervention yet. For the city, the final retreat of the ice may have been the culmination of a long experiment. Humanity had passed its tests, surviving repeated cold spells, mastering fire, developing increasingly sophisticated tools, and spreading to every habitable continent. Now came the moment to remove the environmental constraints and see how the species would expand in a warmer, more stable world. The effects were immediate and dramatic. Forests reclaimed the tundra, pushing the great herds of mammoth, bison, and caribou into smaller and smaller ranges. Warmer climates favored smaller animals with rapid reproductive cycles, and for predators like the saber-toothed cat and the giant short-faced bear, the loss of prey spelled extinction. The megafaunal world unraveled in just a few centuries, a blink in geological time. Known history often places much of the blame on overhunting by humans, pointing to overkill models where small bands of hunter-gatherers could over time drive large animals to extinction. But there's another angle. These species may have been allowed to disappear because they no longer served the city's evolutionary agenda. Large, slow-breeding species could not adapt quickly to changing conditions, while humans thrived precisely because they could. Removing megafauna may have been an intentional act to accelerate human dominance over ecosystems. The retreating ice also revealed something else: new lands and forgotten memories. Rising seas submerged vast coastal plains, drowning landscapes that had been home to human settlements during the glacial maximum. This may be where many of humanity's flood myths originate, the memory of seeing entire worlds vanish beneath the waves, leaving only the highlands as safe havens. In some cases, these drowned lands might have contained points of contact between humans and the city, now forever hidden beneath the ocean. As the world warmed, another event shook the climate: the Younger Dryas. Around 12,900 years ago, just as the thaw seemed unstoppable, temperatures plummeted again to near glacial conditions for over 1,000 years. In the orthodox explanation, this was likely caused by the sudden influx of cold freshwater into the North Atlantic, disrupting ocean currents. But to those who suspect manipulation, it could have been a calculated final freeze, a way to delay full deglaciation until human societies had adapted further. The Younger Dryas ended as abruptly as it began. Around 11,700 years ago, the Holocene epoch dawned. The ice sheets were in full retreat, sea levels rose at an astonishing pace, sometimes several meters in a century, and the climate stabilized into a relatively warm temperate state. This stability, rare in geological terms, created the perfect stage for the next leap: the agricultural revolution. From the city's perspective, this was the moment to watch closely. Humanity was shifting from mobile bands of hunter-foragers to settled agricultural communities. Villages became towns, surplus food enabled specialization, trade networks began to knit together disparate groups. For the first time in Earth's history, a single species was creating a planetary-scale system of communication, resource extraction, and environmental modification. But this posed a dangerous paradox for the city. On one hand, humanity's rise meant the experiment had succeeded beyond expectation. On the other, it meant that a rival intelligence, one unbound by the city's ancient directives, was now emerging. In the deep archives beneath the waves, there may have been debates: should they intervene directly to guide human civilization, or remain in the shadows and monitor from afar? This era is rich with mythological resonance. Stories of gods descending from the sky or emerging from the sea appear in cultures separated by oceans. The Sumerians spoke of Oannes, a being from the sea, who taught humanity agriculture, writing, and law. Indigenous peoples from the Americas to Oceania have tales of teachers or bringers of light who vanish back into the waters once their task is done. In the known historical lens, these are symbolic or purely mythic narratives, but through the hidden truth lens, they may be cultural echoes of limited, highly controlled contact between the city and early Holocene humans. The Holocene's warmth brought a new rhythm to life on Earth. For the first time in human history, the seasons could be predicted with relative certainty. The endless migrations that had defined the Ice Age gave way to settlements rooted in fertile valleys, riverbanks, and coastal plains. In the accepted historical narrative, this is where humanity's story of civilization begins, with the domestication of plants and animals, the rise of agriculture, and the emergence of permanent towns. but the hidden truth suggests this was not an entirely independent development. Archaeologists have long puzzled over why agriculture appears almost simultaneously in multiple, widely separated regions: the Fertile Crescent, the Yangtze and Yellow River valleys, Mesoamerica, and the Indus Valley, within just a few thousand years. Mainstream explanations lean on convergent evolution. Humans in different places stumbled upon the same solution because the climate favored it. Yet, to those seeking deeper patterns, this near synchrony is suspicious. It mirrors the way a controlled experiment would be run. Multiple test groups seeded with the same variables to observe outcomes across different environments. If the city beneath the ocean had been waiting for humanity to cross a certain threshold of technological and social complexity, this was it. Stable climates allowed for food surpluses, which in turn freed individuals from the constant work of hunting and gathering. Surpluses meant specialists: potter, weavers, priests, and builders. With specialization came the need for organization, governance, and eventually, cities. The first urban centers like Jericho, Çatalhöyük, and Eridu emerged not just as clusters of homes, but as complex social organisms. They had communal storage facilities, religious spaces, and trade networks that reached hundreds of kilometers. In the known record, these developments are the product of human ingenuity, but in the hidden account, there's a possibility that some of these early cities were accelerated by outside guidance, subtle but transformative nudges from the unseen stewards of the deep. Architecture plays a critical role here. The sudden appearance of megalithic construction, structures far larger and more precise than necessary for survival, raises questions. Sites like Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey, dated to over 11,000 years ago, predate the commonly accepted start of agriculture, yet boast intricate carvings and monumental stone pillars weighing tons. The orthodox view calls it a ritual site built by hunter-gatherers, a testament to their organizational skill. The hidden truth perspective asks, how did such a site appear? Without the agricultural surplus needed to support non-food producing builders, was it perhaps designed as a cultural ignition point by an intelligence far older than our species' urban ambitions? These early cities also share peculiar features. Across continents, from Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica, we see alignments with solstices, equinoxes, and star patterns. Mainstream archaeology explains these as practical, agricultural societies needed to track the seasons, but some of these alignments point to celestial events and cycles far beyond the needs of farming, as if the builders were encoding knowledge meant for the long term, even on a cosmic scale. From a cinematic standpoint, the story of humanity's first cities is ripe with contrast. On one side, dusty archaeological digs revealing the foundations of walls and hearths. On the other, a deep ocean vantage point, structures hidden beneath the waves, watching the flicker of firelight in settlements far above, monitoring humanity's first experiments with urban life. Trade networks expanded rapidly. Obsidian from Anatolia found its way to Levantine settlements. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan traveled thousands of kilometers to adorn Mesopotamian temples. This was humanity's first taste of globalization. The known view is that trade emerged naturally from resource scarcity and surplus. But in the hidden truth framework, one wonders if such networks were encouraged to foster interdependence, ensuring humanity's civilizations would rise together rather than in isolation. Religious structures also surged in prominence. Temples in early cities often stood at the highest point, both physically and symbolically. The ziggurat, the pyramid, and the mound, forms repeated across continents, may have had a common origin. Orthodox interpretations see them as convergent solutions for visibility and grandeur. Yet their proportions, slopes, and internal layouts often hint at mathematical and astronomical knowledge difficult to reconcile with the available tools and skills of the time. Could these be echoes, deliberate or accidental, of architectural principles from the city in the deep, preserved through myth and ritual? The hidden city's influence, if it existed, may not have been direct in the sense of visible intervention. Instead, it might have worked through selected individuals, visionaries, shamans, or priest kings, who claimed divine inspiration or dreams of strange places beneath the sea. Such claims, dismissed as mythology in the modern world, may in fact have been memories encoded through generations of encounters with those who guarded the ancient experiment. As human cities grew, so did complexity and fragility. Agricultural surpluses depended on weather patterns remaining stable, trade routes were vulnerable to political conflict, disease could spread more easily in dense populations, and yet, despite these vulnerabilities, the city form persisted and expanded. From the hidden city's perspective, this was a sign of success. Humanity was building self-sustaining systems capable of reshaping the planet. We see the culmination of this early urban experiment in places like Uruk, the Sumerian city, that by 5,000 years ago boasted tens of thousands of inhabitants, monumental architecture, writing, and a complex bureaucracy. To historians, Uruk is a triumph of human innovation. To those reading the hidden record, it is the flowering of seeds planted thousands of years earlier, when the ice retreated, when the first settlements rose, when human hands carved impossible stones in the shadow of guidance we can barely imagine. Civilization's infancy was not without peril. For all the stability the Holocene promised, Earth's history warned that nothing was guaranteed. The last 4 mass extinctions had arrived with little warning, sudden catastrophic events that reshaped the planet's life. Humanity's first great cities were barely a few centuries old when the planet offered a reminder: extinction is always closer than it appears. In the mainstream account, the early Holocene was a calm period, a time when climate stabilized and human culture flourished without major interruptions. But the hidden record paints a different picture. There were moments when the balance nearly broke, when civilization teetered on the edge of a collapse so profound that history might have skipped over humanity entirely. One of the most mysterious threats came in the form of the 8.2-kilo-year event, a sudden and severe cooling that struck around 6,200 BCE. Mainstream climatology attributes it to the catastrophic draining of North America's glacial lakes into the North Atlantic, disrupting ocean currents and plunging much of the northern hemisphere into centuries of drought and famine. To human settlements, this was a crisis they were not yet equipped to handle. Crops failed, rivers shrank, migration routes became desperate journeys. In some regions, archaeological layers reveal abandoned settlements, their walls collapsing into the dust. The orthodox story ends there: a climatic hiccup, a human struggle, and eventual recovery. But in the hidden truth perspective, this event may not have been entirely natural. The suddenness of the cooling, combined with its perfect timing to challenge fledgling cities, could be seen as a stress test, either conducted by the deep ocean city's architects or by rival forces seeking to derail their experiment. Evidence for this interpretation lies in the uncanny resilience of certain sites. While many cities were abandoned, others seemed almost prepared, as if stockpiles of grain and fresh water had been gathered in anticipation. Göbekli Tepe, which had been mysteriously buried centuries earlier, may have been sealed not as an ending but as a time capsule, its knowledge preserved against a coming disruption. How could purely agrarian societies, without complex meteorological science, have predicted such a shift? The 8.2 event was not the only brush with catastrophe. Around 5,900 BCE, rising seas from the melting of the last Ice Age ice sheets breached the land bridge between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea, in what some researchers call the Black Sea Deluge. In the known historical record, this was a dramatic but localized flood. In the hidden narrative, it becomes a near-extinction level scenario for cultures along the coastlines. Entire communities were swallowed, their histories erased, except for scattered myths of great floods. Flood stories appear across cultures, from Mesopotamia's Epic of Gilgamesh to the biblical Noah, from Hindu tales of Manu to Native American accounts of rising waters. Mainstream anthropology sees these as independent, metaphorical retellings of local disasters, but the hidden view suggests they are fragments of a single shared memory, an event that nearly reset humanity's progress, perhaps the very fifth extinction that the deep city labored to prevent. From a cinematic standpoint, this period is one of relentless tension. On one side, we see lush agricultural fields drying into cracked earth, rivers pulling away from parched banks, and desperate caravans of families leaving once thriving towns. On the other, we cut to the dark stillness beneath the ocean, a vast silent metropolis lit by alien luminescence, where watchers debate whether humanity can survive its first real test as a civilization. This was also an era of disease emergence. The domestication of animals, for all its benefits, brought humanity into close contact with pathogens it had never encountered. Early plagues may have swept through urban populations, killing indiscriminately and weakening the social fabric. In mainstream history, these outbreaks are seen as inevitable byproducts of urbanization. In the hidden record, they may have been unintended side effects of a larger experiment, or possibly deliberate trials designed to select for resilience. Not all threats came from nature. The archaeological record hints at the first large-scale human conflicts during this time, organized warfare between city-states or tribal coalitions. Mainstream explanations point to competition for resources during droughts and famines, but if the hidden city sought to shape humanity into a cohesive global network, these wars would have been an alarming deviation. War, once introduced, could spiral out of control, undoing millennia of progress in decades. There is a strange pattern here. For every disaster, there is a corresponding leap forward in human adaptability. The droughts of the 8-2 event spurred irrigation innovations in the Fertile Crescent. Floods drove the development of complex flood control systems along the Nile and Euphrates. Warfare accelerated metallurgy, fortification design, and diplomacy. It is almost as if these challenges, no matter how devastating, were calibrated to force technological and cultural evolution, pushing humanity toward a future it could not yet imagine. From the perspective of the deep city, this would have been a dangerous gamble. Too severe a catastrophe, and humanity could vanish entirely. Too mild, and there would be no incentive for growth. If the hidden truth is correct, then the fifth extinction was not an extinction at all, but the closest humanity has ever come to failing its trial. The archaeological silences of this period are telling. In some regions, centuries pass with little to no building activity, as if entire generations were consumed simply by survival. Yet, when the historical record resumes, the cities are larger, more complex, and more interconnected than before. It is as though humanity had endured a long winter of the mind, only to emerge with renewed vigor. The contrast framing of this section is sharp. Known history, the early Holocene was a calm foundation for human civilization, interrupted only by brief regional setbacks. Hidden truth, civilization's infancy, was nearly cut short by climate events, floods, disease, and war, some possibly orchestrated as stress tests, others as sabotage. The fifth extinction was not a clean wipe of species, but a near miss that left humanity changed forever. By the time the planet stabilized again, humanity's urban experiment had passed through fire. Those who survived had new technologies, deeper myths, and a collective memory of vulnerability. The deep city, if it existed, must have recognized that the game had shifted. Humanity had proven it could survive crisis, but also that it could be unpredictable, even defiant. The fifth extinction that almost was, may have been the final unplanned moment when humanity's fate balanced on a knife's edge. The watchers in the deep could no longer be certain that the experiment would follow its intended path. From here onward, humanity's growth would accelerate beyond the control of any single guiding hand, and that, in the hidden narrative, was the true beginning of the modern age. Humanity today walks the surface of the earth with the confidence of a species that believes it has conquered its past. Our cities are vast, our technology astonishing, our reach extending beyond the planet itself. Yet, for all our mastery, faint traces remain, whispers from an age long before recorded history, that suggest we may not be the first to stand at this height. These are the present echoes of something older, deeper, and far stranger, the memory of the city that survived 5 mass extinctions. In the mainstream narrative, our archaeological record begins only a few thousand years ago. We see the rise of Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and China, and assume these are the starting points of organized civilization. Our oceans, covering more than 70% of the planet, are mostly unexplored. There is no consensus in academia that anything of high civilization existed before these known cultures. The unexplained is dismissed as anomaly, coincidence, or misinterpretation, but in the hidden history perspective, our present world is littered with artifacts, structures, and phenomena that align too well with the idea of a deep ocean metropolis, a city that endured cataclysm after cataclysm, far from the gaze of surface dwellers. The evidence is fragmentary, yet its pattern is unmistakable. One of the clearest echoes is in submerged architecture. Along the coasts of Japan's Yonaguni Island lies a stepped stone structure the size of a stadium, complete with terraces, platforms, and broad staircases. Mainstream geologists argue it is a natural formation, the product of tectonic activity. But to those who follow the hidden thread, Yonaguni is a collapsed outer district of the deep city, a ceremonial gateway for surface dwellers who once traded with the ocean's inhabitants. Similar sites dot the globe: the Bimini Road in the Bahamas, a pathway of massive stone blocks resting just offshore, the Gulf of Cambay ruins off India, showing geometric foundations submerged under 120 feet of water, ancient stone causeways off the coast of Malta, and the strange underwater walls near Micronesia's Nan Madol. Mainstream explanations vary: erosion, glacial flooding, local building traditions, but the hidden view weaves them into a single tapestry. They are fragments of a once global coastal network, each a port of entry to a civilization that could survive where others drowned. These echoes are not confined to stone. There are linguistic fingerprints, shared root words for deep city and watcher that appear in otherwise unrelated languages, words that may have outlived their original reference, carried forward in oral traditions. In Sumerian, Abzu meant the primeval sea. In Maya, cenote described sacred wells believed to connect to the underworld. In Norse, Aegir was the sea giant who hosted banquets for the gods. To the hidden historian, these are not just poetic metaphors, but faint, garbled references to a tangible inhabited realm beneath the waves. Modern science, too, has brushed against these echoes, often without realizing it. In 2018, researchers mapping the seafloor of the North Atlantic stumbled upon a grid-like formation nearly 2 miles across. It was dismissed as an artifact of sonar scanning, but the pattern's precision was unnerving, long parallel lines intersecting at perfect right angles. In the hidden narrative, such finds are not accidents, they are glimpses of architecture so old that nature has begun to reclaim it. Perhaps the most startling modern echo comes from genetics. Studies of mitochondrial DNA have revealed that certain isolated coastal populations carry genetic markers that do not match their inland neighbors. These markers trace back tens of thousands of years, suggesting contact with an unknown seafaring group long before the official dawn of navigation. In the hidden truth, these were the emissaries of the deep city, surface hybrids tasked with maintaining trade, knowledge exchange, and cultural influence. Culturally, we have never lost the fascination with underwater worlds. From Plato's Atlantis to Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, from the mythic mermaids of Europe to the Ningen sightings in Japan's icy waters, the human imagination keeps returning to the idea that something intelligent lies beneath. Mainstream thinkers attribute this to psychology, fear of the unknown, projection of human traits onto nature. But the hidden historian suspects that we are not merely imagining, we are remembering. The contrast framing here is clear. Known history, humanity's past is shallow in time, its mysteries rooted in the deserts and river valleys, where our earliest civilizations bloomed. The ocean is a dangerous, empty expanse, occasionally yielding shipwrecks and fishing grounds. Hidden truth, the ocean holds the longest-running civilization in Earth's history, one that has endured calamities that erased every rival. Its remnants still lie scattered in shallow waters, and its influence still threads through our myths, languages, and genes. There is also the possibility that the deep sea is not entirely silent. Modern sonar has picked up anomalous sounds, the bloop, Julia, and other unexplained underwater noises, so loud they can be heard across entire ocean basins. While mainstream science explains most of these as icequakes or volcanic activity, a handful remain stubbornly unexplained. To those reading the hidden record, these are not geological events but industrial or architectural undertakings, construction, excavation, or perhaps even the operation of ancient defense systems. In a more unsettling vein, several deep-sea expeditions have gone missing or returned with incomplete data. The official causes range from mechanical failure to unexpected currents, but rumors persist of equipment vanishing without trace, cameras damaged by unknown forces, and unmapped trenches that seem to swallow entire submersibles. While the mainstream dismisses such stories as exaggerations, the hidden narrative warns that the deep sea has reasons to remain hidden, and the means to ensure it. If these echoes are real, they pose an uncomfortable question: why are they reaching us now? Have tectonic changes exposed new ruins? Is the deep sea itself stirring after millennia of dormancy? Or perhaps most unnervingly, is it responding to humanity's recent activities, our sonar pings, deep drilling and oceanic mining ventures, like an ancient guardian suddenly roused from slumber? The 21st century has given us unprecedented tools for exploring the oceans: autonomous drones, high-resolution mapping, DNA sampling from water itself. The same technologies that can reveal the deep sea's traces could also provoke its attention. For the first time since the fifth extinction that almost was, surface civilization is approaching the deep with the power to detect and disrupt what lies there. And so we stand at the edge of another choice. In the known history, our future with the ocean is about resources, conservation, and climate change. In the hidden history, it is about reunion or confrontation with a civilization that has been watching us grow for thousands of years. Whether they see us as partners, children, or rivals will determine whether the sixth mass extinction will finally claim us, or whether we will join them in the city that has never fallen. Every civilization that has stood upon the earth, whether on land or beneath the sea, has faced a moment when survival was no longer a matter of slow adaptation, but of sudden trial. For the city that survived 5 mass extinctions, each of those trials reshaped its structure, its population, and its strategy for remaining hidden. Now, as humanity rises to technological dominance and begins to probe the ocean's deepest reaches, the question is no longer whether there will be a sixth trial, it is whether we will trigger it ourselves. In the mainstream view, our era's greatest challenges are self-made: climate change, pollution, geopolitical instability, and the overexploitation of natural resources. The ocean is a victim in this story, warming, acidifying, overfished, and rising. If mass extinction comes again, it will be because we failed to control our appetites. This perspective sees the deep as a passive realm, responding only to the changes we impose upon it. But in the hidden truth, the deep sea is not passive. It is patient. It has endured for millions of years by understanding one immutable fact of survival: when the surface world grows dangerous, you do not wait for destruction, you act before it arrives. If we are approaching the sixth trial, it may not be a natural disaster that sets it in motion, but a calculated decision from the depths. Evidence of this looming tension is already visible. As humanity's technology grows, our exploration has shifted from shallow coasts to abyssal plains and Haddle trenches, precisely the domains that have remained untouched for eons. Mining companies now eye manganese nodules scattered across the deep sea floor. Energy corporations experiment with extracting heat from hydrothermal vents. Nations deploy fleets of autonomous submersibles into previously inaccessible realms. Each of these ventures brings us closer to something the deep city may not want us to find. From the hidden perspective, this is not simply environmental encroachment, it is an invasion of territory. To a civilization that has survived meteor strikes, volcanic winter, and the collapse of ecosystems, humanity's machines are a novel threat. Not because they can overpower the deep city's defenses, but because they suggest that for the first time since the last trial, the surface has developed the curiosity and persistence to seek the truth without stopping. Historical patterns warn us what happens when the surface and deep realms collide. In oral traditions from Polynesia, there are stories of the Tangaroa Wars, in which sea beings punished islanders who built too far into the shallows. In Dogon cosmology, the Namo amphibious teachers from the water retreated in anger after humans defied their instructions. In Norse myth, the Midgard serpent awakens when human ambition reaches too far across the seas. Mainstream scholars interpret these as moral allegories. The hidden narrative sees them as encoded warnings from a shared history of conflict. The possibility that the deep city may act preemptively raises a stark contrast. Known history framing, humanity is the sole agent of change in the Anthropocene, and only we can decide whether to avert ecological disaster. Hidden truth framing, there is another player in this game, one older, more experienced, and more willing to act decisively than we are prepared for. Some researchers working outside official channels suggest that the anomalous sonar events and missing submersibles of recent decades are not random accidents, but controlled encounters. They argue that the deep city has been testing our capabilities, assessing our persistence, and mapping the extent of our intrusion. These are not attacks yet. They are the first moves in a strategic game that has been played many times before. If the sixth trial comes, it may not resemble any disaster we have imagined. It might not be a meteor, a supervolcano, or even the slow suffocation of climate collapse. Instead, it could be targeted disruption, the sudden loss of oceanic trade routes, unexplained collapses of undersea communication cables, mass strandings of ships and submarines, and perhaps even the engineered triggering of seismic events along coastal fault lines. In the hidden history, these are the kinds of tools a civilization like the deep city would use, not to annihilate us, but to reset our trajectory before we become a permanent threat. Yet the hidden narrative is not purely fatalistic, it leaves room for contact without conflict, if we choose it. Across the last 5 trials, the deep city's survival strategy has included selective alliance. Legends of fish people teaching agriculture, navigation and metallurgy to early cultures may not be fantasy, but records of these alliances. If history repeats, the coming years could be a moment when we are invited rather than eliminated. The choice may depend on whether we approach the ocean as conquerors or as students. We stand at a crossroads. On one path, the known history story continues. Humanity learns to manage its excess, heals the ocean, and preserves it as an ecosystem for our own benefit. On the other, the hidden history unfolds. Humanity is confronted with an intelligence that has endured for millions of years, and we must decide whether to join it, rival it, or perish before it. The cinematic imagery is stark. Imagine fleets of drones descending into darkness, their lights catching on impossible structures. Picture a vast, luminescent dome rising from the silt, as if to greet or warn the intruders. Hear the low inhuman resonance of a signal that is not language as we know it, but still carries intent. In this moment, the sixth trial would not be an abstract idea. It would be the defining encounter of our species. The final question, then, is not whether the deep city can survive another mass extinction. It has proven that 5 times over. The question is whether we can survive meeting it. That will depend on how we handle the next few decades, whether we rush into the depths with drills and greed, or descend with humility and the readiness to listen. The known history says our fate is in our hands alone. The hidden truth whispers that it has never been entirely ours. The sixth trial may already be underway, not as a single cataclysm, but as a quiet contest of wills between the surface and the deep. And somewhere far below, the point where sunlight fades, the city that survived 5 mass extinctions may be watching, waiting to see which version of the story we choose to live.